No, it's not. It's not. So the LA paradox is another thing. So I didn't go through why I think not behaving in the LA way is also irrational. But it basically, I think the simplest version is just, I think you believe in the sure thing principle. I think sure thing principle, I think, is incredibly compelling, right? So, okay.
One question.
Yeah.
On that third bullet point,
yeah.
what are some of the ways they go about trying to predict behavior, not using expected utility?
I don't even want to get into that literature, but there's like other representations. There's ways that relax the probability stuff, which is called minimax expected utility, where people have a set of priors and they always choose the most pessimistic thing, and it leads to this. I mean, there's a zillion different ways you can go about doing it other than expected utility. But I think that calling those rational is just crazy. But I don't think that means there aren't ways that are irrational that people behave. And we'll talk about those in a bit. Okay, so many risky situations involve, just like the ones we were talking about, things which are either you getting money or getting things which can be sold in a marketplace and are therefore like pretty much equivalent to money. And so we're going to be particularly focused on how people behave with regards to money. So let's denote the utility function that people get for their lifetime wealth. This is sort of based on Friedman's permanent income hypothesis. You should only care about your lifetime wealth. And we typically assume that this is concave. And the basic idea behind that, I think, is that sort of there's the things you enjoy doing most, like eating, then, having something to eat. Then there's the things that, like, the next things you spend money on, like having a roof over your head, and so forth. And, like, as you go on, you're just getting, like, less and less valuable things that you're spending the money on, and so your utility should decline as a function of your marginal utility should decline as a function of your wealth. So the marginal dollar is more valuable to the poor than the rich. However, there are some clear counterexamples that one could find to this. And Kyung-Yel, is Kyung-Yel here? Kyung-Yel Kane? No. Okay, does anyone else want to think of a counterexample? Yeah, Charlie.
Like relative consumption? Yeah, like if you just care about...
No, but I'm not saying that just when it would not be concave in your own wealth.
That's an example. Like, if you're just comparing yourself to people in your income bracket, then you're gonna, as you get wealthier, you might need more money to match them, so the marketing utility doesn't decline.
But I think it would still be holding fixed other people's wealth. It might. Oh, you're saying that that I move up my comparison group.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's try holding fixed all that stuff and like just give a very does anyone have like just a very classical reason why this might not be the case? Strong case you can make that people are being irrational there. I mean, just something that's just like very clearly completely rational, classical, simple reason. So, if you need to start a business, right? It might take a certain amount of capital to start that business, right? And it might be not very useful to you to have more money until you get enough to start the business. Or you want to buy like a new house, right? So over a small range of income, it's very reasonable that you might be convex. Because if you can't buy the house, it's not worth anything to you. Yeah, Andre.
More aggregate, can you think of the poverty trap as an example?
Yeah, possibly. Possibly, I'd have to think about it. You're saying, so like, if you don't reach some threshold, then you just get sucked back down, basically. Yeah, so possibly.
So you can only do that even in the individual. You have any other examples to see that?
I think indivisible goods are the most compelling reason why you don't have concavity. But the thing is, it's often easy in the world to find relatively fair lotteries. You can play poker online where it's very efficient, they don't take much out. So anytime you're feeling risk-seeking, it's pretty easy to get that risk that you need. And so usually in practice, even if, because of indivisibility, people are risk-seeking over some range, they can always sort of concavify their utility by taking these fair bets. And so we will almost universally assume that people's utility is weakly concave, but that doesn't rule out people not being strictly concave. That is, people might well be risk neutral. And in fact, you might think to yourself, well, for maximizing expected utility, why not maximize expected wealth? Yeah.
Something that Murphy mentioned a while back, like if we're thinking of lifetime income, how likely it is that goods are invisible? Because we usually think of things as consumption for a period of time, or you think of you changing the quality of your house or the quality of the...
Yeah, I mean, lifetime income also smooths things out quite a bit because anything is a small part of your lifetime income. So I mean, that's another reason why things can get smoothed out. But you can still imagine some things being somewhat lumpy and probably not very lumpy. Probably only over a very small range. But okay, so does anyone here think that they're risk neutral? So I can make a laughing stock out of them. Anyone want to pretend like they think that they're risk neutral? No. Okay. Tough luck for me. So you're willing to play the game? Okay. So let's play the following game. Flip a coin. If it's tails, you get $2. If it's heads, flip it again. If it's tails, you get $4. If it's heads, flip it again. If it's tails, you get $8. If it's heads, flip it again. 16, 32, etc. How much would you be willing to pay for this bet?
Probably about $8.
Yeah. How much would a risk-neutral person be willing to pay for this bet?
It's supposed to be a 50.
Yeah. Ergo, you're not risk-neutral. So, what do you think? James Marone? Yeah. What do you think is the maximum that a reasonable person would be willing to pay for this bet?
I mean, I would just pay $2.
But what? that was. But what do you think the maximum? Like, at what point of willingness to pay would you say someone's irrational to pay that much?
I think that's a percentage of their wealth or something.
Yeah, whatever you want it to be.
I mean, I would say they should. I mean, a very small percentage of their wealth.
Yeah, 10% maybe at most.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so then that puts like a lower bound on the degree of risk aversion that someone has to have in order to be a reasonable person. So that says that if you're willing to put that bound, that says not only do you think people have to be risk averse to be rational, they have to sort of CRA coefficient we could go calculate it. It would be something like, you could just calculate that. So this means that people have to at least eventually be risk averse. That means they might be risk seeking over some very small range because of indivisibilities, but eventually they have to be risk averse. Okay, so one common measure of risk aversion is what's called absolute risk aversion. This is how much does your marginal utility fall as a fraction? So by what percentage does your marginal utility fall when your wealth increases by a certain amount? And if this is constant, then you can just solve this differential equation and get that utility has to have this form. What's called the constant absolute risk aversion, or CARA form. And what this is equivalent to saying is that your willingness to pay for a 50% chance of getting $100,000 is constant, regardless of your current wealth level. Now that seems completely crazy, right? I mean, you can't, I'm sure that a rich person would be willing to pay more for a 50% chance of getting $100,000 than a very poor person would, right? So this CARA specification is not very plausible, but it's very tractable with a normal distribution of outcomes, and so people use it fairly often. Another measure of risk aversion is by what percent does your marginal utility fall when your wealth increases by a certain percent, rather than a certain amount. And if this is constant, then your utility has to take this form, W to the 1 minus rho over 1 minus rho, and this means that you're willing to pay the same fraction. The way you were phrasing it, Jim, is exactly right. You're willing to pay the same fraction of your wealth for a 50% chance to increase your wealth by the same percentage. Right? Which seems much more reasonable. Now, CARA seems much more reasonable than CRA, and the question is, but within the class of CARA utility functions, which one seems closest to the way people actually think? Now, it's going to turn out that the case when rho goes to 1 is going to be very useful, and I'm not even trying to pronounce this person's name, but Sayed is the name? Yeah. What do you go by? rho goes to 1 in this class. Yeah, it's log utility because you use L'Hopital's rule, right? You take the derivative of the top and the derivative of the bottom, and you get 1 over. Yeah.
Okay, you need a -1 actually.
Yeah, you do. But anyways. That's right, Charlie. So this is a super intuitive utility function because it says that how much your happiness increases when your wealth increases by a certain percentage is constant regardless of your wealth. So doubling your wealth will always make you twice as happy. It's mathematically probably the most convenient form in the widest range of cases, but more importantly, I think it has more empirical support than any other form. And there's a number of different studies that do this, but let me just give you one of my favorites. So this is from Sachs et al., 2011. And what they use is subjective well-being data. So you might think that this is quite questionable. It's like when someone comes to you and says, on a ladder of life from 0 being the worst life you can imagine living to 10 being the best life you can imagine living, you know, you can imagine that would depend on all things like what do you think they're asking for, and, you know, what do you, who are you comparing yourself to, and what's the definition of what a best life is, you know, and what do you imagine? So you would think that this would be, you would get total crap answers out of this. Astonishingly, that's not true. So astonishingly, this equation, H being the response to this, equals 0.35 times someone's lifetime, log of someone's lifetime wealth, fits incredibly well across totally different contexts, in different countries, you know, all different, any way you slice it, this seems to fit incredibly well. Yeah?
People's perception of well-being cannot, can be like non-linear. For example, if it's answered from 4 to 5, it will be not different between like 8 to 9 or 9 to 10.
Sure.
Yeah, so in that case, it's not linear enough, so can we say
So why is it exactly this? I mean, there's lots of things that you could do, you can say that are wrong with this. I mean, I could make you a list of 100 different things that ex ante would have led me to think that this was total bullshit. But the fact that you end up getting this sort of a fit, no matter how you cut the data, is a pretty compelling thing to say that there's something real going on here, right? I mean, so, because almost any story you can tell like that would lead you to some prediction that it shouldn't be that you consistently get the same relationship. Now, I'm going to show you this, and if you guys ever, in your dissertation work, get a relationship like this, like, you're going to get a very good job. So here is, for each of these individual countries, all over the world, they run the regression within the country. And then here's the dot that represents the mean in the country, and here's the regression across countries. And they're all like exactly the same. All the within country regression lines are the same, and the cross country regression line is parallel to all of them and the same. So countries do differ in ways that aren't related to income, but not a lot actually. And they differ in income in exactly the same way within countries, in all countries, and across countries. Pretty amazing. So this is probably the most compelling case for thinking of log utility, I think, is a pretty good way to think about things. Now, so I think both from a normative perspective, in other words, how we think people should behave, and in terms of predicting actual behavior, risk aversion is a pretty useful concept. However, the risk aversion we've been talking about so far is purely from the declining marginal utility of wealth. And what that means is only if a bet leads you to a substantial change in your lifetime wealth should you care about it. And that's very interesting when you're thinking about investing. It makes a big difference. But when you're thinking about everyday things, it really doesn't make much of a difference, and therefore you should act in a risk-neutral way. And Matt Rabin gives a very sharp